Margaret couldn't button her own shirt. At 68 years old, this successful retired teacher, who had spent decades shaping young minds, couldn't perform the simple task of getting dressed without help. Her fingers, twisted and swollen from years of arthritis, simply wouldn't cooperate anymore. That morning, as tears of frustration rolled down her cheeks while her husband fastened the buttons for her, she made a decision that would change everything. She was going to try something she never imagined she would consider in a million years: cannabis. This is the story of how a grandmother who once believed marijuana was a dangerous drug became a passionate advocate for medical cannabis. It's a story about pain, hope, and the courage to challenge everything you thought you knew. Let's rewind 6 months before that pivotal morning. Margaret's arthritis had been progressing for 15 years, but the last year had been devastating. The osteoarthritis that started in her hands had spread to her knees, hips, and lower back. Every joint in her body seemed to be staging a rebellion. The pain was no longer just an inconvenience. It had become the central feature of her existence, coloring every moment of every day. Her mornings were a special kind of torture. She would wake at 4:30, not because she wanted to, but because the pain wouldn't let her sleep anymore. Her hands looked like gnarled tree branches, her knuckles red and swollen. The stiffness was so severe that for the first hour after waking, her fingers were essentially useless. She couldn't hold a coffee cup. She couldn't turn on the faucet. She couldn't open her medication bottles, which was particularly cruel since she desperately needed the medication inside them. Margaret had become a walking pharmacy. Ibuprofen, acetaminophen, prescription anti-inflammatories, stomach protectors because the pain medications destroyed her stomach lining, sleep aids because the pain kept her awake, and anxiety medication because living with constant pain had triggered anxiety attacks. She was taking 11 different pills every day, and none of them were actually making her better. They were just barely keeping her functional, and even that was starting to fail. The side effects were almost as bad as the arthritis itself. The pain medications gave her constant nausea and stomach pain. She had developed gastritis and had to add another medication to manage that. The stronger prescription painkillers made her foggy and disconnected, like she was experiencing life through a thick pane of glass. She couldn't drive safely while taking them. She couldn't focus on conversations. Her grandchildren would visit, and she'd feel like she was missing precious moments because her mind was clouded by medication. And then there was the fear. Margaret's doctor had suggested trying opioid pain medication, and she had refused. She had watched the news coverage of the opioid epidemic. She had read the statistics about addiction and overdose deaths. The idea of taking those medications terrified her more than the pain itself. She had always prided herself on being sharp, independent, and in control of her faculties. The thought of becoming dependent on powerful narcotics felt like losing herself entirely. But living with the pain was also a form of losing herself. The vibrant, active woman she had been was disappearing. She had given up nearly everything she loved. Watercolor painting, her passion for 30 years, was impossible when she couldn't hold a brush. Gardening, which had been her meditation and joy, was abandoned when kneeling became agony, and gripping tools was impossible. She had resigned from the library board, where she'd volunteered for a decade, because sitting through 2-hour meetings was unbearable. Her social life had evaporated. Friends stopped inviting her to lunch because she always had to decline. Her book club continued without her. She missed her grandson's baseball games because sitting on bleachers was too painful, and she couldn't climb up to the seats anyway. She watched from the sidelines, literally and figuratively, as life happened without her. The psychological toll was crushing. Margaret had always been the strong one, the person everyone else leaned on. Now she needed help with the most basic tasks. Her husband had to open jars, button her clothes, help her in and out of the car. She felt like a burden. The constant pain and loss of independence triggered depression. Some mornings she didn't want to get out of bed at all, not just because of the physical pain, but because she couldn't face another day of limitation and frustration. That's when her daughter Sarah intervened. Sarah was a nurse practitioner working in a pain management clinic, and she had been watching her mother's decline with growing concern. She saw patients every day who were trapped in the same cycle: chronic pain, medication side effects, declining quality of life, and no real solutions. But she had also started seeing something else. Patients who were trying medical cannabis and experiencing remarkable improvements. Sarah knew her mother's views on marijuana. Margaret had been a teacher during the height of the war on drugs. She remembered the DARE programs and the messaging that painted cannabis as a dangerous gateway drug. Sarah knew this conversation would be delicate, but she also knew her mother was suffering unnecessarily. One Sunday afternoon, as Margaret struggled to lift a coffee cup with both hands, Sarah decided to speak up. She told her mother about a patient, a 72-year-old woman with severe rheumatoid arthritis who had been wheelchair-bound and had started using CBD oil. Within 3 months, this patient was walking again. She told her about another patient who had eliminated 4 of his 6 pain medications after starting cannabis therapy. She spoke carefully, presenting facts and personal observations, not pushing, just opening a door. Margaret's first reaction was exactly what Sarah expected: complete dismissal. Cannabis was a drug. It was illegal. It was something kids used to get high. The idea of her, a respected retired educator, using marijuana was absurd. But Sarah had anticipated this. She had brought research papers, articles from medical journals, and information about CBD, the non-intoxicating compound in cannabis that was showing promise for inflammation and pain. Here's what broke through Margaret's resistance. Sarah asked her a simple question. If there was a plant-based medicine that might reduce her pain, allow her to cut back on medications that were destroying her stomach, and help her play with her grandchildren again, wouldn't she at least want to learn about it? When framed that way, Margaret's curiosity overcame her prejudice. Over the next 2 weeks, Margaret did something she had always done well: research. She approached the topic like a school project, reading everything she could find. She learned that cannabis had been used medicinally for thousands of years before prohibition. She discovered that the human body actually has an endocannabinoid system, a network of receptors that regulate pain, inflammation, and immune response. She read studies from Israel, where medical cannabis research was decades ahead of the United States. She watched videos of doctors, actual medical doctors, explaining how cannabinoids work and why they might be particularly effective for inflammatory conditions like arthritis. The more she learned, the more her skepticism transformed into cautious hope. This wasn't about getting high. This was about a legitimate medical treatment that her own government's prejudice and outdated laws had kept from her. She felt a surge of anger at all the years she had suffered while this option existed, but was hidden behind stigma and misinformation. Margaret made an appointment with her doctor, bringing a folder full of research articles and a list of questions. Dr. Chen had been her physician for 12 years and knew her medical history intimately. Margaret expected resistance, maybe even judgment, but Dr. Chen surprised her. The doctor explained that she had been recommending medical cannabis to appropriate patients for about 2 years and had seen remarkable results in many cases. She acknowledged that the research was still evolving, but said that for patients like Margaret, who had tried everything else, it was absolutely worth exploring. They spent 45 minutes discussing options. Dr. Chen explained the difference between CBD and THC, the two main cannabinoids. CBD wouldn't make Margaret feel high or impaired, but it had powerful anti-inflammatory properties. THC was more complex, providing additional pain relief, but also producing psychoactive effects that some patients found uncomfortable. They could start with pure CBD and add THC later if needed. The doctor was refreshingly honest about what they didn't know. Cannabis affects everyone differently. Some people respond dramatically, others see modest improvement, and a small percentage don't respond at all. Dosing is more art than science, because decades of prohibition had prevented the kind of large-scale clinical trials that exist for conventional medications. But the safety profile was excellent, especially compared to the medications Margaret was currently taking. They discussed delivery methods. There were oils that could be taken orally, absorbed under the tongue for faster effect. There were capsules for those who didn't like the taste of the oil. There were topical creams and lotions that could be applied directly to painful joints. There were even transdermal patches. For Margaret, they decided to start with a sublingual CBD oil and a topical cream, a combination that many arthritis patients found effective. The quality conversation was crucial. Dr. Chen emphasized that Margaret needed to be extremely careful about where she purchased products. The CBD market was flooded with inferior products. Some contained almost no actual CBD despite label claims. Others were contaminated with pesticides, heavy metals, or residual solvents from poor extraction methods. Margaret needed to look for products with third-party lab testing, clear labeling, and transparent manufacturing practices. Dr. Chen recommended two specific companies she trusted, both known for working with medical professionals and maintaining rigorous quality standards. Margaret left the appointment with a prescription for a medical cannabis card, which would give her legal protection and access to higher quality products through licensed dispensaries. She felt something she hadn't felt in months, genuine hope. The products arrived 4 days later. Margaret opened the package like it was Christmas morning. The CBD oil came in a small amber glass bottle with a dropper for precise dosing. The label was professional and detailed, listing the exact CBD content, extraction method, and batch number. A QR code linked to the third-party lab results. The topical cream came in a sleek pump bottle and smelled faintly of eucalyptus and mint. Following Dr. Chen's instructions carefully, Margaret started with a low dose, 0.5 milliliter of CBD oil, held under her tongue for 60 seconds, twice daily. She applied the topical cream to her most painful joints, her finger knuckles and her right knee. Then she waited. The first day brought nothing. Margaret wasn't disappointed because she had been warned that effects took time. The second day was the same. By day 3 she thought maybe, possibly, her morning stiffness was slightly less intense, but she couldn't be sure if that was real or wishful thinking. Week 1 passed with subtle changes that were hard to quantify. Maybe she was sleeping slightly better. Maybe her baseline pain was fractionally lower. She kept meticulous notes in a journal, rating her pain level 3 times daily on a scale of 1 to 10, noting her mobility, her medication use, and any side effects. This is what Dr. Chen had told her to do, and Margaret was nothing if not a diligent patient. Week 2 brought the first undeniable change. Margaret woke up one morning and realized she had slept through the entire night. She hadn't woken up 3 times from pain. She hadn't tossed and turned, searching for a comfortable position that didn't exist. She had slept for 7 uninterrupted hours. When she got out of bed, the usual hour of severe stiffness lasted only about 30 minutes. She noticed she could make a fist, something that had been impossible for months. By week 3, Margaret attempted something she hadn't done in over a year. She tried to paint. She set up her watercolors at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly with nervousness. She picked up a brush, and her fingers, while not normal, could grip it. She made a stroke across the paper. Then another. The fine motor control wasn't perfect, but it was functional. Tears streamed down her face as she painted for 20 minutes, creating a simple landscape of trees and sky. It wasn't her best work, but it was proof that she was getting herself back. The changes accelerated through the first month. Margaret's pain ratings in her journal told the story clearly. She had started at a consistent 8 or 9 out of 10. By week 4, she was averaging 5 or 6, with some days as low as 4. She had reduced her ibuprofen intake by more than half. She was sleeping better than she had in 5 years. Her mood improved dramatically. Her husband commented that he felt like he had his wife back. The follow-up appointment with Dr. Chen at 6 weeks was emotional. Margaret brought her journal and couldn't get through reading it without crying. The doctor reviewed the data and was impressed but cautious. First-month improvements are often dramatic, she explained, but can plateau. They discussed increasing the CBD dose slightly and adding a very low dose of THC at night, which might further improve sleep and pain relief. Margaret agreed to try it. Month 2 brought stabilization. Margaret's pain levels remained around 4 to 5 out of 10, occasionally spiking to 6 on particularly active days or during weather changes. But this was manageable pain. This was pain she could live with. More importantly, this was pain that didn't prevent her from living. She returned to her book club, and her friends were shocked at the transformation. She was animated, engaged, laughing. She could hold the book for the entire discussion. She attended her grandson's baseball game, sitting in the bleachers and cheering loudly. She started volunteering at the local senior center, teaching a watercolor class once a week. The students in that class had no idea they were witnessing a miracle. To them, she was just a talented teacher sharing her skills. To Margaret, every moment of that class was a gift she thought she'd lost forever. The physical changes were obvious, but the psychological transformation was equally profound. Margaret had her identity back. She wasn't just a pain patient anymore. She was an artist, a grandmother, a volunteer, a friend. The depression that had shadowed her for months lifted. The anxiety about her future diminished. She could envision a life that wasn't centered entirely around managing pain. 3 months into treatment, Margaret decided to share her story at the senior center. She was nervous about the stigma, worried that people would judge her. But she felt compelled to speak up because she knew how many other seniors were suffering with arthritis pain, trapped by the same misconceptions she had held. She stood in front of 30 people and told her story. She talked about the pain, the medications, the side effects, and the desperation. She talked about her initial prejudice against cannabis and how research and good medical advice had changed her mind. She talked about the results she had experienced. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then the questions began. How much does it cost? Where do you get it? Does it make you high? Will my doctor approve? Is it legal? What if I fail a drug test? Margaret answered every question honestly. She emphasized that she wasn't a doctor and couldn't give medical advice, but she could share her experience and encourage them to have conversations with their own physicians. After the presentation, 7 people approached her privately. They all had chronic pain conditions. They had all been told by family members or even doctors that medical cannabis was inappropriate or dangerous. Margaret gave them information, pointed them toward reputable sources, and encouraged them to advocate for themselves. Over the following months, Margaret became an informal resource at the senior center. She created a simple handout with information about medical cannabis for chronic pain, including research citations, quality considerations, and how to find qualified physicians. The senior center director asked her to present again and then again. Word spread. She was invited to speak at other senior centers, at arthritis support groups, and eventually at a regional conference on aging and wellness. Margaret's message was always the same. Medical cannabis isn't a miracle cure. It's not right for everyone, and it should only be used under medical supervision. But for those who have tried everything else, for those suffering with chronic pain that diminishes their quality of life, it's an option worth exploring. The stigma and misinformation that surrounds cannabis have caused unnecessary suffering for millions of people. We owe it to ourselves to look past the propaganda and examine the evidence. She was also honest about the challenges. Cannabis therapy isn't cheap. Her monthly costs ran about $150, and insurance didn't cover a penny. For seniors on fixed incomes, this could be prohibitively expensive. The legal landscape was confusing and inconsistent. What was legal in her state might be completely prohibited in the next state over. Quality control remained an issue with many substandard products on the market. Finding a knowledgeable doctor could be difficult in some areas. But despite these obstacles, Margaret believed the option should be available to anyone who might benefit. She became involved in advocacy efforts to expand her state's medical cannabis program and improve insurance coverage. She wrote letters to legislators sharing her story. She participated in town halls and public hearings. Now, nearly 2 years after that morning when she couldn't button her own shirt, Margaret lives a life she couldn't have imagined. Her arthritis hasn't disappeared. She still has difficult days. She still uses her topical cream daily and takes her CBD oil religiously. But her pain is managed. She has reduced her pharmaceutical medications from 11 pills daily to just 3. Her stomach problems have resolved completely. She's off the anxiety medication. She sleeps well naturally, without sleep aids. She paints 3 or 4 times a week. Her garden flourishes because she can work in it again. She plays with her grandchildren, getting down on the floor to build block towers and crawling through obstacle courses. She travels with her husband, something they had stopped doing because her pain made travel miserable. They recently took a trip to visit national parks, hiking easy trails and enjoying landscapes she thought she'd never see. Margaret's story isn't unique. Across the country, thousands of seniors are discovering that medical cannabis offers relief when conventional treatments have failed. Research is accelerating, with new studies examining cannabis for arthritis, neuropathic pain, and other chronic conditions. Medical schools are beginning to teach cannabinoid medicine. The stigma is slowly eroding as more people share their experiences. But Margaret knows there are still millions of people suffering unnecessarily, held back by outdated beliefs, lack of information, or fear of judgment. She continues to speak out, to share her story, to encourage others to explore all their options. At 70 years old, she's living proof that it's never too late to challenge what you think you know, to try something new, and to reclaim your life from chronic pain. Her message to anyone struggling with arthritis or chronic pain is simple but powerful. Don't give up. Don't suffer in silence. Talk to your doctor about all available options, including medical cannabis. Do your research. Be your own advocate. Quality of life matters. Pain steals so much from us, not just physical comfort but joy, relationships, purpose, and hope. If there's a safe, legal option that might help you get those things back, isn't it worth exploring? Margaret knows her experience won't be universal. Some people won't respond to cannabis therapy the way she did. Some will face obstacles she didn't encounter. But she also knows that sharing her story might reach someone who desperately needs hope. It might give someone the courage to have a difficult conversation with their doctor. It might challenge someone's assumptions and open their mind to possibilities they had dismissed. 2 years ago, Margaret thought her life was over. She thought pain would define the rest of her days. She was wrong. And she wants everyone to know that they might be wrong too. There is hope. There are options. And sometimes the most powerful medicine comes from the most unexpected places.